In a quaint, old house on the outskirts of town, the air always seemed colder and the nights longer. The locals whispered about it, but no one dared to venture inside. It stood there, abandoned yet eerily inviting, with its chipped paint and ivy-covered walls. Its most unsettling feature, however, was the absolute silence that enveloped it. Emma, a curious writer looking for inspiration, decided to spend a night there. She believed the tales of the house were merely local folklore, exaggerated over time. With her notebook and pen in hand, she stepped inside, greeted by a thick layer of dust and the faint smell of decay. As she explored, she noticed something strange. The walls seemed to absorb every sound. Her footsteps, normally echoing in such an empty space, were muffled. Even her own breathing seemed quieter. It was as if the house itself was listening. She set up her writing station in the living room, lighting a few candles to push back the encroaching darkness. Hours passed as she wrote, but an uneasy feeling gnawed at her. It felt like she was being watched, but she brushed it off as paranoia. Around midnight, the silence grew heavier, almost oppressive. The candles flickered despite the lack of breeze. Then, she heard Ida faint whisper, so soft it was barely discernible. It seemed to come from the walls themselves. Emma froze, straining to hear. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices overlapping. Some were pleading, others angry. She could make out fragmented sentences. "Help me. Trapped. Can't escape." Panic set in, but Emma forced herself to stay calm. She pressed her ear against the wall, trying to make sense of the voices. They spoke of being trapped within the house, of lives cut short and souls imprisoned. Suddenly, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She spun around, but no one was there. The temperature dropped sharply, and she could see her breath in the air. The whispers turned into cries and screams, echoing through the room. Terrified, Emma grabbed her things and ran towards the door. But as she reached it, the door slammed shut on its own. The walls seemed to close in on her, the cries becoming deafening. Desperate, she pounded on the walls, pleading to be let out. The voices responded, louder and more frantic, until they suddenly stopped. Silence enveloped the room once more. Emma's heart raced as she backed away from the door, her mind racing for a way out. Then, she saw a figure standing in the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light. It was a woman, her face twisted in anguish. "Leave," the woman whispered, her voice merging with the walls. "Or you will join us." With a surge of adrenaline, Emma rushed to the window, breaking the glass with her notebook. She climbed out, cutting her hands on the shards, and fled into the night, never looking back. The house stood silent once more, its secrets hidden within its walls, waiting for the next curious soul to venture inside. And from that day on, Emma never spoke of what happened. Her only reminder, the unfinished story in her notebook titled "The Silence of the Walls." Years passed, but Emma could never quite shake the memories of that night. Despite her attempts to move on, the experience haunted her dreams, each night filled with the cries and whispers of the trapped souls. She tried to channel her fear into her writing, but her words seemed hollow, lacking the true terror she had felt. One evening, Emma received an unexpected letter. The envelope was old and yellowed, the handwriting elegant but unfamiliar. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief message: "You are not free yet. Return to the house and set us free." Emma's hands trembled as she read the note. She had told no one about her experience, and yet someone knew. The thought of returning to the house filled her with dread, but she felt a strange compulsion to obey. She needed closure, both for herself and for the souls trapped within. Armed with a flashlight and a recorder, Emma made her way back to the old house. It looked even more decrepit than she remembered, as if it had been waiting for her return. She hesitated at the door, the silence already pressing down on her, but she steeled herself and stepped inside. The interior was just as she had left it, but now she noticed details she had missed before: old photographs on the walls, faded and torn furniture covered in dust but arranged with a strange sense of order, and, most unsettling of all, a large mirror in the living room that she hadn't seen during her first visit. As she approached the mirror, she felt a chill run down her spine. Her reflection seemed off, the room behind her darker and more menacing. She reached out to touch the glass, and the surface rippled like water. Suddenly, she was pulled into the mirror, the room around her dissolving into darkness. When she opened her eyes, she found herself in a twisted version of the house. The walls were blackened, and the air was thick with sorrow and anger. The whispers were louder here, the voices clearer. "Help us," they cried. "Break the curse." Emma realized she was no longer alone. The spirits of the trapped souls surrounded her, their faces contorted with pain. They reached out to her, their hands cold and desperate. She wanted to run, but something inside her knew she couldn't leave them like this. "How?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The spirits pointed to a door that hadn't been there before. Gathering her courage, Emma walked towards it and opened it. Inside, she found a small room with a single object on a pedestal, an old, ornate key. "This will free us," the spirits said in unison. Emma took the key and felt a surge of energy course through her. She turned back to the mirror, the spirits following her, and thrust the key into the glass. The mirror shattered, releasing a blinding light that filled the room. When the light faded, Emma found herself back in the living room, the mirror gone and the house silent once more. The spirits were gone, their presence replaced by a sense of peace. Emma knew they were finally free. As she left the house for the last time, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The nightmares ceased, and her writing flourished once more. She had faced her fear and set the spirits free, and in doing so, had freed herself as well. Emma never returned to the house, but she often thought of the souls she had saved. The old house remained a silent sentinel on the outskirts of town, its dark history forgotten, its walls no longer whispering of the past.